spectacular blast. A rocket carrying supplies to the International Space Station explodes during launch. Plea for prayers. Pope Francis asks us to pray for Ebola victims and those caring for them. No more room. Mexico City's shortage of cemetery space threatens a culture of honoring the dead. And iconic editor remembered. Trailblazing journalist Ben Bradley's funeral is held at Washington's National Cathedral. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, October 29th, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. The explosion of a rocket bound for the International Space Station sparks an in-depth investigation tonight. The FAA and NASA are trying to figure out why the rocket blew up just seconds after launch. Wyatt Goolsby joins us now with that story.
Brian, it is too early to tell what caused the rocket to explode, but investigators will have to sort through the debris and detailed information from the launch itself. But a catastrophic launch has plenty of people around the nation and the world asking what happened.
3, 2, 1.
Observers of last night's launch of an unmanned supply rocket in Wallops Island, Virginia, thought they were going to watch a normal liftoff. Instead, what they saw was an explosion 6 seconds after takeoff. Spectators across the bay say the blast even shook the ground where they were standing.
The launch initially seemed to go okay, but within a few seconds I noticed that the top of the top cone of the rocket started leaning to the left. In other words, leaning to the north a little bit.
No one was injured in the resulting explosion, which shot flaming debris onto the launch site. Now, Orbital Sciences, a private contractor who built the rocket for NASA, is looking for answers.
Something went wrong, and we will find out what that is. We will determine the root cause, and we will correct that, and we will come back and fly here at Wallops again.
In total, the rocket was carrying about 5,000 pounds of supplies, including tools and equipment for the International Space Station.
It's a tragedy, and no one in the space launch business likes to see anyone fail. It's a very difficult thing to watch as someone who's part of the industry.
Clay Morey's company, Ariane Space Inc., has successfully launched similar supply vehicles for years. Despite what happened, he says the government will continue to use commercial contractors to build and launch rockets in the future.
And that benefits just about every sector of the economy you can imagine, from launching weather satellites to national security missions to commercial telecommunications satellites that connect the world. It's not seen here on the ground, but it's there.
NASA officials say all the materials lost in the explosion will be replaced and flown to the International Space Station. As for the investigation, some outside experts say the rocket's 1960s-era Russian-built engines may be to blame, but the company's chairman says they expect to zero in on a cause within a week or so. Brian?
Well, thank God only materials and not lives were lost. Thank you, Wyatt. And now some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. The city of Houston is backing down tonight on subpoenas issued to pastors for their sermons and other documents. Mayor Anise Parker made the announcement today. Several pastors were petitioning a city law meant to prevent discrimination based on sexual orientation. The city countered by demanding paperwork, including sermons, from 5 pastors who were working to repeal that law. Pastors called the move an overreach, violating their constitutional rights. Mayor Parker says she made the decision after meeting with local and national clergy yesterday. She insists the move is to protect the city, not because the acts were illegal or violate religious liberties. Pope Francis is calling the response by doctors and nurses helping to contain the Ebola epidemic heroic. The Holy Father urging renewed efforts to defeat the virus. He says he is gravely concerned about the illness. During his general audience today, Francis noted that Ebola is striking parts of Africa where some of the world's most disadvantaged live.
Vi invito a pregare per loro e per quanti hanno perso la vita.
The Pope is asking the world to pray for victims of the deadly virus and those who care for them. Should healthcare workers who have treated Ebola patients be quarantined? Some state leaders think so, but today the president meets and greets some of those caregivers. Jason Calvi reports from the White House tonight. Jason?
Brian, his message is clear. There's no fear to be close to those who have treated Ebola patients. Now, Dr. Kent Brantley introduced the president today at the White House. President Obama says these healthcare workers are American heroes and should be respected. Obama says he knows people are scared, but we have to do what's right. He says the best way to protect our country from Ebola is to stop it at its source in West Africa, and that it's the medical workers that are protecting the country.
All of them have signed up to leave their homes and their loved ones to head straight into the heart of the Ebola epidemic.
The Centers for Disease Control says only those who have come into direct contact with bodily fluids of the infected should be isolated. That includes those who might have touched fluids of patients without wearing protective gear. However, the Defense Secretary is going an extra step in protecting his troops. Today he signed a memo ordering U.S. troops be isolated for 21 days after Ebola missions in West Africa. The Pentagon says it balances comments from family members about safety. Details still need to be worked out, but Secretary Hagel calls the move a safety valve. Now, one nurse that's dealt with the quarantine, Casey Hickox, says she plans to stop isolating herself now that she's in Maine. She told 2 morning shows that she'll violate the policy if it's not changed by tomorrow. Earlier, she was allowed to leave a New Jersey quarantine. She says she isn't sick after working in Africa. Maine's governor says he's seeking legal action to force her to stay in isolation. And today, the bishop of the diocese in Maine praised Hickox's bravery, really, in serving those patients of Ebola in West Africa. Brian?
All right, Jason Calvi at the White House. And the White House says it has dealt with a threat to its unclassified computer network. A White House official says activity of concern was detected while assessing cyber threats. We've been given no details about who may be responsible or when this activity occurred. We're told, though, the situation was resolved immediately. The White House isn't commenting on a Washington Post report suggesting Russia is behind this breach. The Federal Reserve says it will keep interest rates at record lows. That announcement today following a policy meeting here in Washington. The goal of keeping the rates near zero is to help improve the job market. The Fed also says it will end its bond purchasing program that have helped keep long-term rates low. The Fed believes both policies have helped lower the unemployment rate to 5.9%. That's still slightly above its goal. A former Marine from Northwest Indiana, charged with murdering 2 women and suspected of killing 5 others, pleads not guilty. 43-year-old Darren Vann is a convicted sex offender from Gary, Indiana. Police say he confessed to strangling one of the victims and was arrested the following day. He then told authorities where they could find the bodies of more women in abandoned homes. If he's convicted, Vann faces a sentence of at least 45 years in prison and possibly the death penalty for each of those deaths. Abortions induced by drugs are stopped at North Dakota's only abortion clinic as the result of a ruling issued yesterday. The state's high court upheld a law that limits the use of abortion-inducing drugs. Surgical abortions are still being performed at the Red River Clinic in Fargo. Washington said goodbye today to Ben Bradley, one of its storied journalists. Bradley's funeral was held at the National Cathedral. He died October 21st of natural causes at age 93. As the Washington Post's editor, Bradley led the paper's coverage of the Watergate break-in and cover-up. The Post's investigation, of course, led to President Richard Nixon's resignation. Bradley led the Post from 1965 to 1991 after serving in World War II and working at the American Embassy in Paris. Coming up, a massive mudslide in Sri Lanka may have buried several hundred people. And Susanne LaFrankie explores the once solid Catholic voting bloc that's now as fragmented as American society. On Wednesday, the 29th of October, this is EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. Student protest leaders in Hong Kong who want more autonomy from mainland China are asking for direct talks with China's premier. It's been a month since they began their protests. Yesterday, the young people opened yellow umbrellas, beginning a moment of silence to mark their milestone. They're demanding open nominations for the 2017 election of Hong Kong's new leader. Mike Gonzales, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, is with us. Mike, you specialize in research into Hong Kong and China. You know some of these pro-democracy activists that are out there. A month into this thing, what is their take?
Well, you know, I think I've spent 8 years in Hong Kong, and I talked to Martin Lee, the father of the Hong Kong democracy movement, last week. And I think they're making strides. For example, they had the student demonstrators had a negotiation with the government, and then Carrie Lam, the woman who was negotiating on behalf of the government, she said that they were going to write a second report to Beijing. The first report misrepresented the tone in Hong Kong, the feeling in Hong Kong. The demonstrators feel, and then with the government saying they're going to write to China again, and this time correctly assess how the city feels. They feel like this is somewhat of a concession if the government indeed does a good job of it.
Is Christianity in the mix at all? Joshua Long, one of the leaders, is a Christian, right?
Yeah, not just Joshua Long, but Martin Lee is a Catholic. Jimmy Lai, the owner of the largest newspaper, is a Catholic. Joshua Long, obviously a Protestant. But many of them are. Benny Tai is also a Protestant. Another one of the student leaders, a woman, I forget her name right now. She is also a strong evangelical Protestant. So yeah, I mean, there's a strong undercurrent of Christianity in this fight, and it is very important to it. Understanding that angle, that dimension of it, is very important to understanding what's happening in Hong Kong.
And obviously these students want the attention of the world. They can get it with today's technology. How does this affect the way Beijing deals with this, knowing that the world can watch?
Well, you know, they have accomplished, this is one of their biggest accomplishments, actually. You know, I go back to the Venezuelan demonstrations in February, and they got zero global attention for one good reason. They were competing with Ukraine. So the Venezuelan demonstrations were huge. Hong Kong has been very successful because it happened before ISIS. It happened before Ebola. So they captured the global attention, and now they're going to keep it every time they demonstrate. And this puts Beijing at a disadvantage because Beijing is very keen on having good PR in the world. Beijing is a global trading power. It doesn't want the world to think they're a bunch of butchers.
And of course, the U.S. has different relations with mainland China and Hong Kong in terms of economics. How is that different?
Well, we are, you know, China is our second largest trading partner after Canada, and they're very close to Canada. We do about $500 billion worth of business with China, and we run a huge trade deficit, obviously. Yeah. Hong Kong is we run our largest trade surplus.
Big difference.
Big difference because we sell Hong Kong high-end technological goods, dual usage goods that sometimes we don't sell to China itself. We sell to Hong Kong. We also sell a lot of beef to Hong Kong. So Hong Kong is very important in its own right.
And how do you think America, the President, Congress has handled this situation, or not?
Well, the State Department, the President, I think I do get it. He does not like to stand up for democracy and freedom around the world. The fact that there's a Christian undercurrent probably makes it even ickier for him. Congress has just written a letter to the President saying, look, you have to stand up for democracy. It has been the American policy since Washington, but really since Truman, to stand up for democracy around the world. And it is the law. The Hong Kong Policy Act of 1992 says in black and white that we have an interest in the democratization of Hong Kong, that the United States wants Hong Kong to be democratized. And so that is our law. And
they haven't been following through.
No, the State Department, the White House has been very weak. The statements put out, the demonstrators really slammed the statement that our consulate out there put out. The consulate basically said, we take no sides in this. How can we not take sides? We have one side demanding freedom and democracy and the other side denying it. Clearly, the United States takes a side.
Yes. And we appreciate your take, Mike Gonzales with the Heritage Foundation. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Midterms matter as we continue our EWTN News Nightly coverage of election 2014. With now just days away from the off-year election, is the Catholic vote a reality or a relic? Chief White House correspondent Susanne LaFrankie reports tonight.
Long courted by politicians, the so-called Catholic voting bloc has become a reliable, powerful constituency. But over time, Catholics have become more diverse on the issues and the candidates. Many attending a recent noon mass at the Basilica of the National Shrine are very mindful of the upcoming midterm elections.
I vote my conscience, and my conscience is being guided by God as well.
25% of American voters self-identify as Catholics, making up one of the largest single religious denominations in the United States. The so-called Kennedy Catholics, largely Democrats who helped elect the first and only Roman Catholic president, are viewed as a monolithic voting powerhouse. However, the group has fragmented in recent years.
I see three groups of Catholics rather than a single Catholic bloc. We have kind of three blocks.
Dr. Stephen Schneck, an expert on voting patterns of Catholics, says the faithful are divided into three distinctive groups: Latino Catholics, cultural Catholics whose heritage is deeply rooted in Catholicism, and intentional Catholics who regularly attend Mass.
Life issues, of course, are at the top of that list, but it's a long list. It includes preferential option for the poor, openness to immigration, and on and on. So it's a very complicated list. Neither of the two political parties in the United States match up very well against that list.
Here on the campus of Catholic University of America, voters are feeling that pull.
I can't vote democratically in a Catholic conscience because of the abortion issue.
You got to take into consideration more than just the abortion issue when I look at the voting.
Catholics are kind of half Democrat, half Republican if you really think about it, and so it's a little difficult to really find someone that does follow the things that I believe 100%.
In 2008, Catholics turned out in record numbers, helping elect President Obama, who is a vocal supporter of abortion rights. Experts now believe Obamacare, mandating birth control and abortion-inducing drug coverage, may be changing Catholic voters' minds. According to a recent Pew report, this election season, Catholics are trending Republican, up 12 percentage points from 2008. American bishops say the church is not partisan, but Catholics have a moral obligation to consider important church doctrine when voting. Their guide focuses on abortion, traditional marriage, immigration reform, poverty, accessible health care, and peace.
You don't check your faith at the door to the voting booth.
Father Dominic Legg teaches theology at the Pontifical Faculty of the Immaculate Conception. He says Catholics should have a formed conscience before voting and to remember one of the fundamental touchstones of the faith.
John Paul II, when he wrote about the gospel of life, said that the morality of a democracy depends on the choices it makes, above all with respect to the protection of human life and the protection of human dignity.
American bishops say it's up to all Catholics to know the Church's teachings and to make an informed decision before entering the voting booth. Brian?
All right, thanks, Suzanne. On Election Day, next Tuesday, EWTN News Nightly brings you special live Midterms Matter coverage. After our regular 6 p.m. Eastern newscast, we track returns as they come in live starting at 9 Eastern. We'll have expert analysis of the key races and discuss the issues that are important to you. Midterms Matter special coverage, election night, live here on EWTN. Up next, in a culture that celebrates the memory of its dead, Mexico City is running out of cemetery space. We appreciate you watching EWTN News Nightly. Good evening, I'm Brian Patrick. At least 10 people are dead, more than 250 still missing after monsoon rains trigger a huge mudslide in Sri Lanka. The mudslide east of the capital, Colombo, wiped out more than 100 homes belonging to workers for the tea estate. The military sent troops to help with rescue operations. Much of Sri Lanka has received heavy rains over the past few weeks. Warnings had been issued ahead of this disaster. Despite years of rapid economic growth, women in India face some of the world's worst inequity. A survey of 142 nations released this week shows them lagging in healthcare, education, and work situations. The World Economic Forum's annual gender gap report gives India high marks for female political participation, but the country ranks poorly in the bottom 20 for women's income, literacy, and infant survival. Activists in India say lack of safety is preventing Indian girls from going to school. They also say women are developing fewer skills than men and are not valued in the workplace. Rebecca Shah is with the Religious Freedom Project at Georgetown University's Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. So India has laws against prenatal gender identification, yet the girls' birth rate is lower. Is there an explanation for that?
Well, that's actually one of the reasons, Brian, why the gender gap India rates so low on the gender gap. India, I think, is 141 and one of the lowest for health and survival. That's one of the sub-index of that's how the gender gap index. And the reason is basically India has a strong cultural preference for sons. And we know this is not an economic, primarily driven by economic reasons, because you can see a spike in sex-selective abortions of girls, that is sex-selective abortion of girls, which runs across income and other, when you control for income and other indicators and education.
So where do the attitudes come from then, if not economic?
Well, in the past, it used to be that a family needed a son to provide for them economically. But as studies have shown, and that it's not really the very poor only that are aborting baby girls, but it's people who are very wealthy. In fact, one of the main ways in which we know that this is a problem is because you can see the spike in sex-selective abortions is parallel with the introduction of prenatal screening. And the access to prenatal screening comes when people can afford to do prenatal screening, which is the wealthy. Now, there's studies that show that prenatal screening is available in rural areas where the very poor live, but what we see is prenatal screening and the parallel rise in the number of sex-selective abortions, especially for higher order births, that is second and third births, that if a family has one girl, the first is a girl, they're more likely to abort the second child if the second child is a girl. And so that is with prenatal screening. So technology has its downsides.
Yes, it certainly does. So Prime Minister Modi has spoken out in favor of trying to change the plight of women in India. Do you think this is going to happen under his administration?
Well, there certainly is a hope that it will. But I must say, a lot of people are skeptical because Prime Minister Modi was the chief minister of a state called Gujarat, which rates very low on these social indicators, that is maternal mortality, the kind of indicators that go into the gender gap index. So we're concerned. His platform has been trade, and if you can't open up the country to trade, then it will, the country will advance and economic growth will come with that. And many people have been concerned that his focus has been on that and not on social indicators. So
and his record doesn't back up
his record certainly doesn't back that up.
All right, so from the Religious Freedom Project at Georgetown University's Berkeley Center, Rebecca Shah, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, as Mexicans rather prepare for the upcoming Day of the Dead, officials in Mexico City are voicing concerns about cemeteries or lack of them. Our Catherine Zeltner reports.
In Mexico, the dead are celebrated. Graveyards in the capital city lined with extravagant monuments to loved ones, many with touches of home. But many residents might soon be robbed of that tradition. The government of Mexico City says it's running out of space in its cemeteries.
In less than 2 or 3 years, we'll have completely filled all the spaces.
In response, city officials have proposed a law that would limit the amount of time a body can be buried. The hope is that more families will choose cremation. A vote is expected soon.
They tell us that we have to get used to burning our dead, and that is nonsense. Their worldview is not the same as ours.
Holidays like the Day of the Dead are widely celebrated in cemeteries across Mexico. Families here say it's not only about honoring the dead, but preserving their culture. Catherine Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
All right, thank you, Catherine, and thank you for watching tonight. Until tomorrow, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for watching, and we leave you with a few special moments from today's general audience with Pope Francis. Good night, and God bless you.